I got the text at 2 a.m. Mom, please don't come to my wedding tomorrow. You'll embarrass us. The same wedding I'd spent my entire life savings on. I'm Sarah, and I'm talking to you from my small apartment in downtown Phoenix. It's been 6 months since that text arrived. And I finally feel ready to share what really happened, what I did next, and why I have absolutely no regrets. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before that night changed everything. 54 years old, worked as a night shift nurse for 15 years. While running a small catering business during the day. Never married, Jessica's father disappeared when I told him I was pregnant. I raised my daughter alone, and I was proud of it. Every sacrifice, every exhausting 18-hour day, every missed social event was worth it because Jessica was going to be a doctor. And she made it. My baby girl graduated medical school and landed a residency at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the state. I cried at her graduation ceremony, probably embarrassed her then too. But she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Mom." That moment made 28 years of struggle feel like victory. Then she met David Chen during her second year of residency. Nice enough young man, also a doctor. Came from what Jessica called a good family. I didn't think much about what that phrase meant at the time. I was just happy she found someone who made her smile. When they got engaged after 8 months of dating, I was thrilled. My little girl was building the life I'd dreamed of for her. The wedding planning started immediately. David's parents, Richard Chen and his wife Margaret, had very specific ideas about how their son's wedding should look. The venue needed to be elegant. The flowers had to be imported. The guest list swelled to over 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. Every conversation seemed to revolve around appearances and impressions. "Sarah, you understand how important this day is for our family's reputations." Margaret told me during one of our planning meetings at their country club. I nodded and smiled, even though the membership fee for that place was more than I made in 3 months. Jessica got caught up in their vision. My practical, down-to-earth daughter started talking about designer dresses and destination honeymoons. When she showed me the preliminary budget, I nearly choked on my coffee. $85,000 for one day. "Mom, I know it's a lot," she said, fidgeting with her engagement ring. "But David's family has a certain standard, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime event." Here's what she didn't know. I'd been secretly saving for her wedding since she was 12 years old. Every tip from catering jobs, every overtime shift at the hospital, every tax refund went into what I called my, Jessica's Dreams Fund. I had exactly $92,000 saved up. I'd planned to contribute maybe half and keep the rest for emergencies. Or maybe finally take that vacation I'd been postponing for 3 decades. But looking at my daughter's hopeful face, seeing how much this meant to her, I heard myself saying, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll handle it." The next morning, I transferred $85,000 from my savings account to the wedding planner's escrow account. I kept $7,000 for my own dress, shoes, and to cover my bills until the next paycheck. I felt proud, generous, and terrified all at once. The months that followed were a whirlwind of tastings, fittings, and planning sessions. I attended every meeting, offered opinions when asked, and kept my mouth shut when the budget inevitably crept higher. An extra $2,000 for upgraded linens. Another $1,500 for better centerpieces. I covered it all without complaint, dipping into my emergency fund and picking up extra shifts to make ends meet. 3 weeks before the wedding, things started feeling different. Jessica became distant during our phone calls. She'd mention having dinner with David's family without inviting me. Wedding-related updates came through the planner instead of directly from her. When I asked if she needed help with any last-minute details, She'd brush me off with, "Everything's under control, Mom." I told myself she was just stressed. Wedding planning was overwhelming, and she was balancing it with her demanding residency schedule. I'd raised her to be independent, and now she was proving she could handle complex situations. I should have been proud. The Friday before the wedding, I attended the rehearsal dinner at the country club. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing fancy, but appropriate and elegant. I thought I looked nice. I felt excited to finally meet all these people Jessica had been talking about for months. That's when I realized I was the only person there who didn't belong to their world. David's extended family, his parents' friends, his medical school classmates. They all spoke the same language of expensive schools, vacation homes, and social connections. I tried to make conversation, but every topic seemed to highlight the differences between us. During the toasts, David's father spoke eloquently about joining two accomplished families and continuing traditions of excellence. Several family friends mentioned the perfect match between Jessica and David. When it was Jessica's turn to speak, she thanked David's parents for welcoming her into such a wonderful family and making her feel like she belongs. She never mentioned me, not once. I drove home that night with a knot in my stomach, but I convinced myself I was being oversensitive. Tomorrow was her wedding day. Tomorrow, none of these awkward social dynamics would matter. I'd watch my daughter marry the man she loved, and all the money and effort would be justified by her happiness. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. so I'd have plenty of time to get ready. I'd scheduled a hair appointment and planned to arrive at the venue early to help with any last-minute details. My dress was hanging in the closet, a beautiful navy blue number that had cost more than I usually spent on clothes in 6 months. But I wanted to look perfect for Jessica's special day. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with that text message. I read it 3 times before the words really sank in. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall until sunrise, trying to understand how 28 years of love and sacrifice had led to this moment. By 7 a.m., I knew exactly what I was going to do. And for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. The first call I made that Saturday morning was to my bank. Citizens Bank opens at 8 a.m. on weekends, and I was their first customer. "I need to speak with someone about stopping payments," I told the teller, sliding my ID across the marble counter. My voice was steady, businesslike. 20 years of nursing had taught me how to stay calm in crisis situations. "What type of payments, ma'am?" "All of them. Every wedding-related transaction that hasn't been fully processed yet." I pulled out my phone and showed her the detailed spreadsheet I'd created over the past few months. Every vendor, every deposit, every final payment scheduled for today. I want to know what can be reversed and what's already gone. The bank manager, a woman about my age named Patricia, took over my case. She reviewed my account history with the kind of thorough attention I appreciated. No judgment, no personal questions, just professional efficiency. The florist payment went through yesterday, but the final catering payment is scheduled to process Monday morning. The photographer's balance is also pending. The venue rental. That's more complicated because it involves a third-party escrow account. How much can I recover? She calculated quietly for several minutes. If we act quickly, approximately $38,000 can be stopped or reversed. The rest is already in vendor accounts. $38,000. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to send a message. "Do it," I said, while Patricia processed the payment stops. I sat in her office and let myself remember why this hurt so much. Not just the money, though. Losing nearly $50,000 was devastating for someone like me. It was everything that money represented. Jessica was 8 years old when I first started the wedding fund. She'd been invited to her friend Katie's older sister's wedding. And she came home with stars in her eyes, talking about the beautiful dress, the flowers, the dancing. "Someday I want a wedding just like that, Mom," she'd said, spinning around our tiny living room in her pajamas. "You will, baby," I'd promised. "Mommy will make sure you have the most beautiful wedding ever." From that day forward, every financial decision I made was filtered through one question. How much can I save for Jessica's future? I drove my Honda Civic for 12 years past when I should have replaced it. I shopped at thrift stores and learned to alter clothes myself. I canceled cable TV and learned to cut my own hair. Every dollar saved was a dollar toward Jessica's dreams. When she got accepted to college, I was ready. When she decided on pre-med instead of the less expensive education major she'd originally planned, I adjusted my budget and took on more catering clients. When she needed money for medical school applications, interview trips, and eventually tuition costs that exceeded what her scholarships covered, I was there. I never made her feel guilty about the money. That was crucial to me. I'd grown up with a mother who turned every sacrifice into emotional currency, reminding me constantly what she'd given up, for my sake. I swore I'd never do that to Jessica. Her dreams were worth my sacrifices, period. No strings attached. But somewhere along the way, I'd started to assume that my sacrifices had created a bond between us. That she understood, even if we never talked about it directly. How much of my life had been devoted to building hers. That when her big moments came, we'd share them together. Patricia finished the paperwork and slid a receipt across her desk. "The stops are in place. Is there anything else I can help you with today, Sarah?" I looked at my phone. 3 missed calls from Jessica. 2 from the wedding planner, 1 from David's mother. None of them mattered anymore. Actually, yes. I'd like to open a new savings account. Something that only I have access to. I smiled for the first time in hours. I'm thinking of taking a vacation. By the time I got home, my phone was ringing constantly. I let every call go to voicemail and made myself a proper breakfast. Something I hadn't done in months because I'd been too busy with wedding preparations. The first voicemail was from Jessica, and her tone had shifted dramatically from last night's dismissive text. "Mom, there's some kind of problem with the catering payment. Can you call me back immediately? This is really important." The second was from David's mother, and her country club politeness was already showing cracks. "Sarah, I'm sure this is just a banking error. But several vendors are saying their payments have been declined. Please call me as soon as you get this message." The third was from the wedding planner, and she sounded panicked. "Mrs. Martinez, we have a serious situation here. The florist is the only vendor who's been paid in full. Everything else is in limbo. The caterer is threatening to pack up and leave. I need to speak with you immediately." I saved all the voicemails and continued eating my breakfast. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, fresh orange juice. Simple pleasures I'd forgotten about while spending every weekend at wedding tastings and venue visits. Around noon, Jessica showed up at my apartment. I heard her key in the lock, a key I'd given her for emergencies. Followed by her voice, calling out in a tone I hadn't heard since she was a teenager in trouble. "Mom? Mom, we need to talk. Right now." She found me in my living room, reading a travel magazine I'd picked up at the grocery store. European river cruises looked appealing. Maybe it was time to see some of those places I'd been dreaming about for 30 years. Jessica looked beautiful, even in her current state of panic. Her hair was already done for the wedding. An elegant updo that probably cost more than I spent on haircuts in 2 years. She was wearing the silk robe David's mother had given all the bridesmaids. And her makeup was flawless despite the stress. "Mom, what's going on? The wedding planner says all the payments have been stopped. The caterer is packing up their truck. The photographer never showed up. People are calling me asking what happened. And I have no idea what to tell them. I closed the travel magazine and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her. She was upset about the vendors and the money and the disrupted plans. But she wasn't asking about me. She wasn't wondering how I felt about being told to stay home from the wedding I'd paid for. She was just frustrated that her logistics weren't working out. Sit down, Jessica, I said quietly. I don't have time to sit down. My wedding starts in 4 hours. And everything is falling apart. I need you to fix this. Call the bank, call the vendors, do whatever you need to do. Please. That word, please. Finally, she was asking instead of demanding. But it was too late for that. I can't fix this, sweetheart. This is what happens when you uninvite someone from a wedding they paid for. Jessica stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean you can't fix this? Mom, this is my wedding day. You can't just cancel everything because you're upset about one text message. One text message? I set the travel magazine aside and stood up slowly. Jessica, do you have any idea what you said to me last night? She had the grace to look uncomfortable, but she didn't back down. I was trying to be honest with you. David's family. They have certain expectations about how things should look. I thought it would be easier for everyone if you just watched from home. We could video call you during the ceremony. Video call. She wanted me to watch my daughter's wedding through a phone screen. Like some distant relative who couldn't afford to travel. The wedding I'd paid for. With 28 years of saved tip money and overtime shifts. And you thought this was a reasonable solution? My voice stayed calm, but something in my tone must have warned her that this conversation wasn't going the way she'd expected. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I know the family dynamics are awkward, but this day isn't about you. It's about me and David starting our life together. Can't you just be supportive for once? For once. As if supporting her hadn't been my full-time job since the day she was born. I walked over to my kitchen counter, where I'd laid out all the wedding-related paperwork that morning. Payment receipts, vendor contracts, the detailed budget spreadsheet I'd maintained throughout the planning process. Everything organized in neat little piles. Jessica, do you know how much this wedding cost? She shifted impatiently. We went over this months ago. It's a lot, but you said you could handle it. You said it was important to you to contribute. $87,000, I said. Picking up the bank receipt from that morning. Not contribute. Pay for. I paid for your entire wedding. Every flower, every meal, every photograph, every note of music. Your future in-laws contributed exactly $0 to this celebration. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The dress you're wearing under that robe? I paid for it. The makeup artist who did your face this morning? I paid for her. The venue where 200 guests are expecting to celebrate your marriage in 3 hours? I paid for that too. I could see her trying to do the math in her head. Trying to figure out how her working class mother had managed to fund what Margaret Chen had described as an appropriately elegant celebration. I didn't know it was that much, she said quietly. I thought David's parents were helping with some of it. They helped with their opinions, I replied. They had very specific ideas about how their son's wedding should look, and I made sure it looked exactly right. Because I thought I was planning a celebration that would include me. Jessica sat down heavily on my couch. For the first time since she'd arrived. She wasn't focused on the immediate crisis of vendor payments and timeline logistics. She was starting to understand the bigger picture. Mom, I'm sorry about the text. I really am. I was panicking about how everything would look, and I said something stupid. But we can fix this. You can still come to the wedding. We'll figure out the seating arrangements. Figure out the seating arrangements? I almost laughed. Jessica, your wedding planner has been trying to figure out where to put me for 3 months. Every conversation included some version of, where should we seat Jessica's mother? So she's comfortable but not prominent. She winced. That's not. I mean, we just wanted everyone to feel comfortable. Everyone except me, apparently. I walked back to the travel magazine and picked it up again. But you know what? I've decided you were right about one thing. This day shouldn't be about me. It should be about you and David and your new family. The family that doesn't include me. That's not fair, Mom. You're still my family. You'll always be my family. Will I? I looked at her directly. When was the last time you called just to talk to me, not to ask for wedding planning? Help or money? When was the last time you invited me to spend time with you? And David, not at some formal event, where I had to dress up and pretend to fit in with people who make more in a month than I make in a year. She was quiet for a long moment. I could see her thinking, searching her memory for examples that would prove me wrong. The silence stretched until it became its own answer. I've been busy with the residency program, she finally said. And the wedding planning. And getting to know David's family. There's been a lot going on. There certainly has. I opened the travel magazine to a page about Mediterranean cruises. Which is why I think you're mature enough to handle the consequences of your choices. What consequences? Mom, what are you talking about? I showed her the bank receipt. I stopped payment on $38,000 worth of wedding expenses this morning. The florist was already paid, so you'll have flowers. Everything else is up to you now. The color drained from her face. You can't be serious. The wedding is in 3 hours. People are already driving to the venue. David's entire family is expecting. David's entire family can contribute to their own son's wedding, I interrupted. They certainly have enough opinions about how it should look. Now they can invest some of their own money in making it happen. Jessica stood up suddenly, pacing to my front window and back. Mom, this is insane. You can't just destroy my wedding because your feelings got hurt. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply declining to pay for a celebration I'm not welcome to attend. That seems perfectly reasonable to me. She pulled out her phone and started dialing frantically. I'm calling David's dad. He'll know what to do. They can cover the payments until we sort this out. I watched her make the call. Listened to her explain the situation in increasingly frantic terms. From the brief pauses, I could tell Chen was asking questions she couldn't answer satisfactorily. Questions about contracts, payment schedules, vendor requirements. Questions that revealed how little David's family knew about the actual logistics of funding their son's dream wedding. When she hung up, her hands were shaking slightly. He says they need time to contact their bank and arrange the transfers. But the vendors need payment now or they're leaving. That does sound like a problem, I agreed. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're very resourceful when you need to be. Jessica looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Part anger, part disbelief, part something that might have been the first glimmer of understanding. You're really going to let my wedding be ruined over this? I closed the travel magazine and met her eyes. Sweetheart, I spent 28 years making sure nothing in your life was ever ruined by my limitations. I worked night shifts and weekend catering jobs, so you could have everything you wanted. I drove a car with broken air conditioning for 5 summers, so you could go to medical school without debt. I've never once asked you to consider how your choices affect me. I stood up and walked to my front door. But I won't pay $87,000 to be treated like an embarrassment. That's not love, Jessica. That's enabling. And I'm done enabling behavior that hurts us both. I opened the door and held it. You have a choice to make. You can have the wedding you planned with people who respect both of us. Or you can have whatever celebration David's family can arrange in the next 3 hours. But you can't have both my money and my absence. She stared at me for a long moment, then walked toward the door. At the threshold, she turned back. I don't understand how you can do this to me. Someday you will, I said softly. And I hope when you do, you'll understand that I'm doing this because I love you, not because I don't. After she left, I sat back down with my travel magazine. The Mediterranean cruise was looking better by the minute. 2 hours after Jessica left, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Mrs. Martinez? This is Carmen Rodriguez. I'm the head coordinator for Elegant Affairs Catering. We've been handling your daughter's wedding today. I knew Carmen by voice from months of menu tastings and final head counts. But we'd never spoken directly on the phone. All communication had gone through the wedding planner. Hello, Carmen. I assume you're calling about the payment situation. Actually, ma'am, I'm calling about something else entirely. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Privately? Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. Of course. Mrs. Martinez, I've been in the catering business for 15 years. I've worked probably 300 weddings. And I pride myself on staying professional regardless of family drama. But what I witnessed at your daughter's venue this morning, I felt like you needed to know. My stomach tightened. What happened? When the payment issue came up, the wedding planner called the bride's family together for an emergency meeting. I was in the adjacent room, setting up our stations, and I couldn't help overhearing the conversation. Carmen paused, and I could hear kitchen noises in the background. She was calling from work, probably during a brief break. Mrs. Martinez, they were discussing how to handle the vendor payments without involving you. But more than that, they were talking about you specifically. About how relieved they were that you wouldn't be attending today. The words hit me like cold water, but I wasn't surprised. Go on. The mother-in-law, Mrs. Chen, she said something about how they'd been worried about the optics of having you there. She used the phrase, working-class mother, several times. She was concerned about how you'd fit in with their guest list. I closed my eyes. And Jessica? What did she say? That's the part that really bothered me, ma'am. Your daughter. She agreed with them. She said she'd been stressed about how to introduce you to David's colleagues and family friends. She said she was grateful for an excuse to keep the guest list more cohesive. Cohesive. My daughter had used the word cohesive to describe my absence from her wedding. Mrs. Martinez, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Is there more? The father-in-law asked if there was any way to resolve the payment situation without bringing you back into the picture. He suggested they could take out a short-term loan to cover the vendors. Then worry about repaying you later. On their own terms, is how he put it. I felt something sharp and clean-cut through the emotional fog I'd been carrying all morning. This wasn't about a panicked bride making one bad decision under stress. This was a coordinated plan to take my money and exclude me from the family I'd helped create. Carmen, can I ask why you're telling me this? She was quiet for a moment. My own mother worked 2 jobs to put me through culinary school. She cleaned office buildings at night and worked in a school cafeteria during the day. So I could follow my dreams. When I opened my catering business 5 years ago, she was the first person I called. She was in the front row when the food critics reviewed my restaurant. Her voice got stronger. No mother should be treated like an embarrassment. Especially not by the child she sacrificed everything for. It's not right, Mrs. Martinez. And I wanted you to know the truth about what kind of people you're dealing with. After I hung up with Carmen, I sat in my quiet apartment and let the full picture settle into place. This hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision driven by wedding stress. They'd been planning to exclude me all along. Probably since the engagement party when it became clear I didn't fit their social expectations. The phone rang again. This time it was Maria Santos, my next-door neighbor and closest friend for the past 8 years. Sarah, mija, are you okay? I saw Jessica leaving earlier, and she looked upset. Isn't today her wedding? Maria was one of the few people who knew the full financial scope of what I'd invested in Jessica's wedding. She'd watched me work extra shifts, seen me turn down social invitations to save money, listened to me worry about whether I was doing enough to give my daughter the life she deserved. Maria, can you come over? I need to talk to someone who actually knows me. She was at my door in 5 minutes, with a pot of coffee and the kind of direct honesty that only comes from real friendship. Tell me what happened, she said, settling into my kitchen chair like she was prepared to stay all day. I told her everything. The text message, the bank transactions, Jessica's visit, and Carmen's phone call. Maria listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking her head or making small sounds of disgust. When I finished, she was quiet for several minutes. Sarah, I'm going to say something, and you might not want to hear it. Go ahead. This isn't just about the wedding. This is about who Jessica has become since she started dating David. Have you noticed how she talks differently now? How she makes little comments about improving herself and professional networking. I had noticed the subtle changes in vocabulary. The way she'd started mentioning brand names and expensive restaurants. The shift from calling me just to chat to only calling when she needed something. She's been embarrassed by you for months, Maria continued. Maybe longer. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because she's decided there's something wrong with your life. Your work, your apartment, your priorities. She never said that directly. She didn't have to. I've watched her introduce you to David. I was there at the engagement party, remember? She introduced you as my mother, who works in healthcare, instead of my mother who's a registered nurse. She's been managing your image for their benefit. Maria reached across the table and took my hand. The money was just the final insult. This has been building for a long time. I thought about the engagement party Maria was referencing. Jessica had asked me to dress nicely, but not too formally, and had coached me on conversation. Topics that would be appropriate for David's family and friends. At the time, I'd thought she was being thoughtful, helping me navigate unfamiliar social territory. Now I realized she'd been trying to minimize the differences between their world and mine. So what do I do now? I asked. You do exactly what you did this morning, Maria said firmly. You stop paying for people to treat you badly. And you start building a life that makes you happy, instead of just making other people comfortable. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. The wedding happened. David's parents covered the vendors. We had a lovely small ceremony with immediate family only. I hope you're satisfied. I read it 3 times. Then showed it to Maria, who was still keeping me company. Immediate family only, Maria read aloud. Do you notice she doesn't say she missed you? I did notice. What I also noticed was the subtle blame in that final sentence. I hope you're satisfied. As if my refusal to be treated poorly had somehow ruined her happiness. I typed back, I'm glad you had a lovely ceremony. I love you and I wish you all the happiness in the world. Then I turned off my phone and opened my laptop. If I was going to start building a life that made me happy, I might as well begin with that Mediterranean cruise. The one I'd been dreaming about for 30 years. The next morning, Sunday, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months. No wedding vendor calls to return, no last minute details to coordinate, no careful outfit planning to make sure I looked appropriate for someone else's standards. I was making breakfast when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David Chen standing on my doorstep. Still wearing what looked like yesterday's wedding clothes minus the jacket and tie. This was interesting. In 2 years of dating Jessica, David had never once visited my apartment alone. I opened the door and gestured him inside. He looked exhausted, uncomfortable, and younger than his 29 years. Mrs. Martinez, I hope it's okay that I came by. I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday. Of course. Would you like some coffee? He nodded gratefully and followed me to the kitchen. I poured him a mug and waited. This was his conversation to start. Jessica told me about the payment situation and why you made that decision. I wanted you to know that I didn't agree with how my family handled things. I studied his face. David had always been polite to me, but distant. Our interactions had been limited to formal family gatherings, where conversation stayed safely superficial. This was the first time he'd ever initiated a personal discussion. What exactly did your family tell you about the situation? He rubbed his forehead tiredly. That's actually why I'm here. I'm getting different versions of events from different people. And I think I deserve to know the truth. Jessica says you withdrew your financial support because you were upset about not being invited. My parents say you were trying to manipulate the situation to get attention. But none of that sounds like the woman who raised Jessica. I appreciated his directness. What would you like to know? Start with the money. Jessica has always said her family was contributing to the wedding, but she never gave me specific numbers. Yesterday, when everything fell apart, my father had to make some emergency calls to cover vendor payments. The amounts he mentioned, Mrs. Martinez, exactly how much did you pay for our wedding? I pulled out the detailed spreadsheet I'd shown Jessica the day before. $87,432. Here's the breakdown by category. David's eyes widened as he scanned the numbers. This is almost everything. The venue, catering, flowers, photography, music, decorations. He looked up at me. My parents contributed to the rehearsal dinner and the honeymoon. But the actual wedding, you paid for all of it? I did. How? I mean, no disrespect, but Jessica said. You work as a nurse and run a small catering business. This is more money than most people make in a year. I explained about the wedding fund. The 20 years of saving, the extra shifts and weekend work. David listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he was really trying to understand the scope of what I'd invested. Mrs. Martinez, I had no idea. Jessica never told me any of this. When we were planning everything, she talked about family contributions. But she made it sound like both families were sharing the expenses. Did you ask for specifics? He looked embarrassed. No, I didn't. I guess I assumed my parents were handling most of it, since they had such strong opinions about every detail. They kept talking about maintaining family standards and appropriate celebrations for our social circle. I thought that meant they were funding their vision. I poured myself more coffee and sat back down. David, can I ask you something? What did your family tell you about why I wasn't at the wedding yesterday? They said Jessica thought it would be less stressful for everyone if the celebration was kept to immediate family only, that you'd agreed to watch via video call, because you understood how important it was to keep things intimate. And did that explanation make sense to you? He was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, no. It seemed strange that Jessica's mother wouldn't be at her wedding, especially since you two have always been so close. But my parents were handling all the last-minute coordination, and Jessica seemed to agree with their decision. So I didn't push the issue. I showed him the text message Jessica had sent me Friday night. David read it twice, his expression growing troubled. She told you not to come because you'd embarrass them? That's what she said. David set down his coffee mug and leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Martinez, I think my family has been giving me a very edited version of events. Can you tell me exactly what happened yesterday morning? I walked him through the timeline. The bank calls, the payment stops, Jessica's visit, our conversation, and her final decision to proceed with whatever celebration his family could arrange on short notice. So the choice was yours to attend the wedding you'd paid for, or let them have the celebration without you using their money? That's correct. David was quiet for several minutes. I could see him processing information, fitting puzzle pieces together. Probably remembering conversations and interactions that made more sense now. My mother made several comments yesterday about how nice it was to have a cohesive guest list, without any awkward social mixing. I thought she was just pleased that the final head count was smaller than expected. But she was talking about you, wasn't she? I didn't answer directly. What do you think, David? I think my family convinced Jessica that you didn't belong at her wedding. Because you don't fit their social expectations. And I think Jessica went along with it. Because she wanted to fit into our world more than she wanted to stand up for her mother. It was painful to hear it stated so clearly, but I was impressed by his honesty. The question is, he continued, what do I do with this information? Jessica is my wife now. I love her, and I want our marriage to work. But I can't pretend this didn't happen. What does Jessica say when you ask her about it directly? That's the problem. She won't talk about it directly. Every time I bring up yesterday's events, she changes the subject or says she doesn't want to rehash drama from the wedding day. She keeps saying we should focus on moving forward, instead of dwelling on the past. I wasn't surprised. Jessica had always avoided difficult conversations, preferring to wait until problems resolved themselves or others took care of uncomfortable situations for her. David, can I give you some advice? He nodded. Don't let this become the foundation of your marriage. If you start your life together by ignoring how your families treated each other, it will only get worse over time. Jessica needs to decide whether she's embarrassed by where she came from, or whether she's proud of the woman who raised her. And you need to decide whether you're comfortable being married to someone who can be influenced to abandon the people who love her. David stood up slowly. Mrs. Martinez, is there any way to fix this? Between you and Jessica, I mean. I don't want our marriage to be the reason she loses her relationship with her mother. I walked him to the door. That's not up to you, David. And it's not really up to me either. Jessica has to decide what kind of person she wants to be. What kind of daughter, what kind of wife, what kind of woman. I can't make that decision for her. He paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I think my family was wrong. And I think Jessica was wrong. You deserved better than what happened yesterday. After he left, I sat down with my laptop and finally booked that Mediterranean cruise. 15 days, 6 countries, departure date in 3 weeks. For the first time in decades, I was planning a trip that was just for me. Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was getting ready for my first day back at work, since taking vacation time for wedding preparations, when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway outside my apartment. Excuse me, are you Sarah's neighbor? I'm Jessica's Aunt Linda. I was hoping to catch Sarah before she left for work. Linda, my younger sister who lived 3 hours away in Tucson, and rarely visited unless there was a family emergency. I opened my door before she could knock. Linda, what are you doing here? She held up a bag from my favorite bakery and a thermos of coffee. I brought reinforcements. We need to talk. My sister looked tired, like she'd been driving since early morning. She also looked angry, which was unusual for Linda. She'd always been the diplomatic one in our family, the peacemaker, who smoothed over conflicts and found middle ground. I tried calling Jessica yesterday, she said, settling into my living room chair. 3 times. She finally answered on the 4th attempt. Let me guess. She told you I ruined her wedding because I was being selfish and dramatic. Actually, she told me the wedding was beautiful and intimate, and that you chose not to attend because you were uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere. She made it sound like it was your decision to skip the ceremony. I poured coffee from Linda's thermos and waited for the rest. But then I called cousin Miguel, who knows someone who works at that fancy country club, where the reception was supposed to be held. and Miguel's friend, had some very interesting information about Saturday's events. This was getting complicated. What kind of information? The kind that makes me understand why you stopped those payments. Linda's voice got harder. Sarah, did you know that David's parents have been telling people at their country club that they were paying for their son's wedding to that nurse David is marrying? They've been presenting themselves as generous future in-laws who were covering wedding expenses. Because Jessica's family obviously couldn't afford a proper celebration, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They've been lying about who paid for what. It gets worse. According to Miguel's friend, Mrs. Chen has been very specific about the financial arrangements. She told several people that you were contributing what you could, maybe $5,000 or $10,000. And they were graciously covering the rest. Because they didn't want Jessica to be embarrassed by having a budget wedding. I sat down heavily. It wasn't enough that they'd excluded me from the celebration I'd funded. They'd also been publicly claiming credit for my financial sacrifice. There's more, Sarah. Mrs. Chen apparently told her book club that they were worried about having you at the wedding. Because you might feel out of place among their friends and become emotional or demanding. She painted you as a potentially difficult guest. They were trying to manage tactfully. Linda pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. I was so angry when I heard all this that I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I contacted Jessica's college roommate, Anna. You remember Anna, right? She stayed with Jessica for a week last Christmas. I remembered Anna. Smart, direct, from a working-class family like ours. She and Jessica had maintained their friendship through medical school. Though I'd noticed they talked less frequently since Jessica started dating David. Anna told me that Jessica has been editing stories about you when she talks to David's friends and colleagues. Instead of saying her mother worked multiple jobs to support her education, she says her mother works in healthcare. Instead of talking about your catering business, she mentions that you do event planning. She's been repackaging your life to make it sound more prestigious. The careful rebranding Maria had mentioned was worse than I'd realized. Jessica hadn't just been embarrassed by my presence at her wedding. She'd been systematically erasing the reality of who I was and what I'd done for her. Anna also said that Jessica has been very stressed about maintaining appearances with David's family. She's been asking Anna for advice about things like wine selection and vacation destinations because she doesn't want to seem unsophisticated compared to David's previous girlfriends. I thought about all the conversations over the past year where Jessica had seemed to be performing rather than just talking. The careful way she'd started pronouncing certain words, her sudden interest in cultural events she'd never cared about before, her new wardrobe of expensive clothes that looked nothing like her previous style. Linda, why are you telling me all this? My sister leaned forward. Because I think you need to understand that what happened Saturday wasn't just about wedding planning stress or family dynamics. Jessica has been planning to distance herself from us for months, maybe longer. The wedding was just the final step in her transformation. I felt something shift inside me. Not just hurt or disappointment, but a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced before. She's been preparing to cut ties with her old life so she can fully embrace her new one, I said slowly. Exactly. And she was counting on your unconditional love and support to make that transition as painless as possible. She wanted your money and your blessing, but not your presence in her new world. Linda stood up and walked to my kitchen window. Sarah, I've been thinking about this all night, and I have an idea. But you might not like it. What kind of idea? The kind that makes sure Jessica faces the real consequences of her choices. Not just the inconvenience of rearranged wedding plans, but the actual cost of choosing David's family's approval over her relationship with you. I joined her at the window. Outside, people were walking to work. starting their Monday morning routines, dealing with ordinary problems. My life had felt ordinary until this weekend. Now everything seemed different. Tell me your idea. Jessica has been lying to people about your financial contribution and your role in her life. What if those lies had consequences? What if the truth came out in ways that affected her new social standing? You're talking about public embarrassment. I'm talking about accountability. Jessica wants to be part of David's social circle? Fine. But she should be honest about how she got there. David's parents want to take credit for generosity. They didn't show? They should have to explain why the bride's mother wasn't at the wedding they supposedly funded. I was quiet for several minutes, considering what Linda was suggesting. It wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about making sure the truth couldn't be buried under convenient lies. What specifically are you proposing? Linda smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I'm proposing that you stop protecting Jessica from the natural consequences of her choices. Stop covering for her lies. Stop letting David's family claim credit for your sacrifices. Stop pretending that her version of events is acceptable. She pulled a business card from her purse. This is Miguel's friend, the one who works at the country club. Her name is Patricia, and she's willing to help set the record straight about what really happened this weekend. Apparently, she doesn't appreciate rich people lying about working-class families. I took the card and looked at it. Patricia Hernandez, event coordinator. What exactly would Patricia do? Nothing dramatic. Just make sure that the true story of Saturday's events becomes common knowledge among the people who matter to David's family. Let them explain to their friends why they had to scramble to fund their son's wedding at the last minute, and why the bride's mother wasn't there to celebrate. I thought about Carmen's phone call, about David's visit that morning, about Jessica's carefully edited version of events. Maybe it was time to stop letting other people control the narrative about my life. Give me Patricia's number, I said. I think it's time people heard the truth. Patricia Hernandez and I met for coffee Tuesday morning at a small cafe downtown, far from the country club where David's family held their memberships and their carefully constructed social lives. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40. With the kind of professional composure that comes from years of managing wealthy clients and their complicated demands. But when she talked about what she'd witnessed on Saturday, her diplomatic facade cracked. Mrs. Martinez, I've worked in event coordination for 12 years. I've seen every kind of family drama you can imagine. But what happened at your daughter's wedding? That was different. That was calculated. Patricia stirred her coffee slowly, choosing her words carefully. The Chen family didn't just exclude you from the celebration. They rewrote the entire story to make themselves the heroes and you the problem they'd solved. Linda mentioned that Mrs. Chen has been telling people she funded the wedding. It's worse than that. Yesterday morning, Mrs. Chen hosted a brunch at the club for some of the wedding guests who couldn't make it to the rescheduled ceremony. She spent an hour describing how generous they'd been to help Jessica's family with wedding expenses, and how grateful you were for their support. I felt my jaw tighten. She said I was grateful? She told everyone that you'd initially wanted a much larger, more expensive celebration, but they'd helped you understand that simple elegance was more appropriate. She made it sound like they'd saved you from financial embarrassment. Patricia pulled out her phone and showed me photos from the country club's social media account. Pictures from Sunday's brunch, smiling faces around elegantly set tables, Mrs. Chen at the center of it all looking pleased and gracious. She also explained your absence by saying that you'd decided you were more comfortable celebrating at home because large formal gatherings made you nervous. She painted you as socially anxious rather than deliberately excluded. Every lie made me angrier, but also more resolved. Jessica and her new family had created a fictional version of events that protected their reputations while destroying mine. It was time to correct the record. Patricia, what exactly are you proposing? She leaned forward. The club's newsletter goes out every month to all members and their extended social network. About 800 families total, including most of the people who matter in David's parents' social circle. This month's issue includes a feature about recent member celebrations, including Jessica's wedding, including a very flattering write-up about the Chen family's generosity in hosting an intimate family celebration for their son and his new wife. The article specifically mentions their gracious support for the bride's family during the planning process. I could see where this was heading. And you have editorial influence over the newsletter? I write the social events section. And I believe in accuracy. Patricia's smile was small but determined. What if the newsletter included the actual financial details of the wedding? Not in a gossipy way, but as part of a larger piece about the true costs of modern celebrations and how families navigate expenses. The idea was elegant. Instead of dramatic confrontation or public scenes, the truth would simply be documented in the community's own publication. Let David's parents explain to their friends why they'd been claiming credit for expenses they'd never covered. Would you need documentation? Patricia nodded. Bank records, payment receipts, vendor contracts. Anything that shows the real financial picture. I'd also need your permission to interview vendors who were willing to go on record about Saturday's payment situation. I thought about Carmen's phone call, about David's confused questions, about Jessica's version of events. How would this be presented? I don't want it to look like I'm attacking Jessica publicly. It would be framed as an educational piece about wedding financing realities. Your story would be one example of how financial miscommunication can create problems for families. Very factual, very respectful, but very clear about what actually happened. Patricia showed me a draft outline on her phone. The proposed article would cover several local weddings from the past year, examining how different families approached celebration costs. My situation would be presented as a case study in the importance of transparent financial planning. The article would include quotes from vendors about the challenges of last-minute payment changes, and from family members about the stress of mismatched expectations. Nothing vindictive, just honest. It was perfect. The truth would come out, but in a way that looked educational rather than retaliatory. David's parents would have to answer questions from their friends. But I wouldn't look like I was seeking revenge. What would you need from me? Your financial records, contact information for Carmen and other vendors willing to speak on record, and a brief interview about your perspective on what went wrong. I'd also need you to sign a release allowing me to use the information. I thought about Linda's words about accountability and consequences, about Jessica's carefully edited stories and the Chen family's public lies, about David's confused questions and his parents' manufactured narrative. When would this be published? The newsletter goes to print next Monday. It would be in members' homes by the following weekend. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, everyone in David's parents' social circle would know the truth about who paid for the wedding and why I hadn't been there to celebrate. They'd have to explain why they'd claimed credit for generosity they'd never shown. Patricia, I have one condition. What's that? I want Jessica to know this is coming. Not the details, but the fact that the real story is going to be public. I want her to have a chance to tell the truth herself before someone else does it for her. Patricia nodded approvingly. That's fair. How long do you want to give her? A week. If she hasn't corrected the record with David's family by next Tuesday. Then you publish the article as planned. We shook hands over our empty coffee cups. For the first time since Saturday morning, I felt like I had some control over my own story. That evening, I called Jessica. She answered on the fourth ring, and her voice was carefully neutral. Hi, Mom. How are you? I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you settling into married life? We're good. David's parents have been very supportive during this adjustment period. As if my absence from her wedding was just a minor bump in their family planning. Jessica, I need to tell you something important. I've learned that David's parents have been telling people they paid for your wedding, and that I was grateful for their financial help. Silence on the other end of the line. Mom, I don't think we should rehash the wedding details. David and I want to focus on moving forward. This isn't about rehashing anything. This is about lies being told in your name. David's mother is telling people at the country club that you were embarrassed by my financial limitations and grateful for their generosity. I can't control what David's mother says to her friends. Actually, you can. You can tell the truth. You can explain that I paid for your wedding, and that your new family excluded me from the celebration I funded. Another long silence. Jessica, you have 1 week to correct the record with David's family and their friends. If you don't, I will. Is that a threat, Mom? It's a promise, sweetheart. I won't let people lie about my life to protect their own reputations. Not even for you. I hung up before she could respond. Wednesday evening, David called me. His voice was tense in a way I'd never heard before. Mrs. Martinez, we need to talk. Can I come over after my shift ends? Of course. Is everything all right? I'm not sure. Jessica and I had a fight last night, and some things came up that I think you should know about. He arrived at my apartment around 9 p.m., still wearing his hospital scrubs and looking exhausted. This time, he didn't wait for coffee or pleasantries. Jessica told me about your phone call yesterday. About the country club rumors and your ultimatum. She's very upset. I'm sure she is. David sat down across from me, studying my face. Mrs. Martinez, she said you're threatening to embarrass our family publicly if she doesn't do what you want. Is that accurate? That depends on what you consider embarrassing. I told her I wouldn't let people lie about my life to protect their reputations. If the truth is embarrassing to your family, maybe they should examine why that is. What exactly do you know about what my parents have been saying? I told him about Patricia's information, about the brunch stories, and the newsletter feature. David's expression grew increasingly troubled as I explained the details. They told people they paid for the wedding? They told people they generously helped Jessica's family with expenses we couldn't afford. They took credit for funding the celebration they excluded me from. David ran his hands through his hair. This is insane. Why would they lie about something so easily disproven? Because they never expected anyone to fact-check their story. They assumed I'd stay quiet and let them control the narrative. Jessica says you're being vindictive. That you want to ruin our marriage because you're angry about the wedding day. I looked at David carefully. He seemed genuinely confused, caught between conflicting versions of events that didn't match his own observations. David, let me ask you something. After you left here on Sunday, did you talk to Jessica about what I told you? I tried to. I asked her why she'd never mentioned how much money you'd contributed, and why she'd agreed to exclude you from the ceremony. She got very defensive and said I was taking your side against her. What did she say exactly? David was quiet for a moment. She said you were trying to manipulate the situation to make her look bad. She said you'd always been controlling with money, and that you were using your financial contributions to guilt trip her into doing what you wanted. And what did you think about that explanation? It didn't match anything I knew about you or your relationship with Jessica. In 2 years, I'd never seen you be manipulative or controlling. But Jessica was so upset, and she kept saying I didn't understand the complicated history between you two. This was interesting. Jessica was rewriting not just the wedding weekend, but our entire relationship. turning my sacrifices into manipulation, my support into control. David, did Jessica ever tell you why I worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood? She said you were a single mother trying to make ends meet. Did she tell you that I worked night shifts at the hospital and weekend catering events so she could take dance lessons and piano lessons and go on school trips? That I drove a car without air conditioning for 5 years because every spare dollar went toward her college fund? David shook his head slowly. Did she tell you that I took out a second mortgage on my apartment to help pay for medical school expenses her scholarships didn't cover? No. She said you'd always been good with money and had savings put aside for her education. I pulled out a folder I'd been keeping since Sunday. Bank statements, loan documents, receipts from 20 years of Jessica-related expenses. The paper trail of a mother's financial sacrifice. This is the real story of how Jessica became Drive. Jessica Martinez Chen. Every dance recital costume, every textbook, every application fee, every interview trip. I documented it all because I was proud of what we were building together. David looked through the papers, his expression growing more troubled with each document. Mrs. Martinez, this is tens of thousands of dollars over the years. Way beyond normal parental support. It was my choice, my joy. I wanted Jessica to have opportunities I'd never had. But I also wanted her to understand the value of those opportunities. She never told me any of this. When she talks about her childhood, she focuses on how hard it was to be raised by a single mother. How she had to be more responsible than other kids, how she learned to be independent early. Those things are true too. But they're not the whole truth. David set down the papers and looked at me directly. She's been lying to me. Not just about the wedding, but about everything. About your relationship, about your sacrifices, about who you are as a person. I don't think Jessica sees it as lying. I think she's been editing our story to fit the narrative she wants for her new life. The problem is, her edited version requires me to disappear. We sat in silence for several minutes. I could see David processing information, fitting pieces together. Probably remembering conversations that made more sense now. There's something else, he said finally. Yesterday, after Jessica told me about your ultimatum, my mother called. She wanted to know if you were causing problems for our family. What did you tell her? I told her I was trying to understand what had really happened over the weekend. And she said something that bothered me. She said Jessica had warned them months ago that you might become difficult about wedding arrangements because you had boundary issues with money. The careful character assassination was worse than I'd thought. Jessica hadn't just hidden my contributions, she'd actively prepared David's family to see me as problematic. David, did your mother ask you to do anything specific about this situation? She suggested that we might need to limit your access to our lives if you continued to be disruptive. She offered to help Jessica set better boundaries with you. I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. They weren't just excluding me from events. They were planning to systematically cut me out of Jessica's life entirely. And what did you tell her? I told her I needed to think about everything that had happened. But Mrs. Martinez, I need you to know something. Whatever problems exist between you and Jessica, I don't want my family making them worse. David stood up to leave, then turned back to me. Can I ask what you're planning to do about the newsletter article? Jessica is terrified about what you might say publicly. I'm planning to tell the truth. About the money, about the planning, about Saturday's events. Nothing more, nothing less. And if Jessica corrects the record with my parents first, then there won't be anything newsworthy to report. After David left, I called Patricia. How many people have heard the Chen family's version of events so far? Based on what I've learned from other club members, probably 50 or 60 families. The story has been spreading through their social network. Since Sunday's brunch. Then Jessica has more than her own reputation to protect. If she wants to fix this quietly. Exactly. The longer she waits, the more public the correction will have to be. I hung up and looked at my calendar. 4 days until Jessica's deadline. 4 days to see if my daughter would choose truth over convenience. I wasn't particularly optimistic. Friday morning, I got a call that changed everything. The caller ID showed Jessica's name. But the voice that greeted me was Margaret Chen's. "Sarah, this is Margaret. I hope you don't mind that I'm calling from Jessica's phone. We need to have a conversation." The fact that she was using Jessica's phone told me everything I needed to know about who was controlling this situation now. "Good morning, Margaret. What can I do for you? I think you know why I'm calling. This nonsense about newsletter, articles and public embarrassment needs to stop immediately. You're being incredibly selfish." Her tone was different from any of our previous interactions. Gone was the polite condescension she'd used during wedding planning. This was direct, aggressive, the voice of someone used to getting her way through intimidation. "I'm being selfish by wanting people to know the truth? You're being vindictive because your feelings were hurt. Jessica made one small decision about the guest list. And you're trying to destroy her marriage over it. Margaret, did you tell people at your country club that your family paid for Jessica's wedding?" There was a pause. "I may have mentioned that we contributed significantly to the celebration. You told them I was grateful for your financial help with expenses. I couldn't afford. You said I chose not to attend because I was nervous about formal social events. Sarah, I was trying to spare you embarrassment. People were asking questions about why the bride's mother wasn't at the wedding. I gave them an explanation that protected your reputation." The audacity was breathtaking. She was claiming that her lies were actually kindness to me. Protected my reputation by saying I'm too poor and socially anxious to attend my own daughter's wedding? I said you were more comfortable with smaller, intimate gatherings. There's nothing wrong with that. There's something wrong with lying about who funded the gathering, Margaret. Especially when you're lying to take credit for generosity you didn't show. Her voice got harder. "Sarah, I'm going to be very direct with you. Jessica is part of our family now. David has a promising medical career ahead of him. And Jessica is building her own professional reputation. They don't need the kind of drama you're trying to create." What kind of drama am I creating? By wanting credit for my own financial sacrifices? The kind that makes people question Jessica's judgment and David's family background. Do you really want to be responsible for damaging your daughter's future? There it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the suggestion that protecting my own reputation would somehow hurt Jessica's career prospects. "Margaret, let me be very direct with you. I spent $87,000 on a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. Your family has been lying about both the money and my absence. If the truth damages anyone's reputation, that's a problem you created, not one I caused. Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. Let me explain what will happen if you continue down this path. Jessica and David will be forced to choose between protecting their professional relationships and maintaining contact with you. Is that really what you want?" The ultimatum was delivered in the same tone Margaret might use to discuss dinner arrangements. Casual, certain, as if she were explaining obvious facts rather than making threats. "You're saying they'll cut me out of their lives if I don't stay quiet about your lies?" "I'm saying that actions have consequences. If you create public embarrassment for our family, there will be social and professional costs. Jessica understands this, even if you don't." I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of crystal clear certainty about what I was dealing with. "Margaret, put Jessica on the phone. Jessica is at the hospital. She asked me to handle this conversation because she's too upset to deal with your threats directly. She asked you to call me, or you decided to call me." Another pause. Does it matter? We're all on the same page about this situation. Put Jessica on the phone, Margaret. Now, Sarah, I've been trying to be reasonable with you, but. I hung up. Within 10 minutes, my phone rang again. This time it was Jessica's voice. But I could hear Margaret speaking in the background. Mom, please don't hang up. We need to resolve this. Jessica, are you alone? We're all here discussing the situation. All? David's parents and David and me. We're trying to figure out how to handle what you're threatening to do. A family meeting about me, without me. They were strategizing about how to manage the problem I'd become. Jessica, I gave you a week to correct the lies. Your new family has been telling about our lives. That deadline is Tuesday. What have you decided? Mom, we've talked to several people. And everyone agrees that bringing this up publicly will just make things worse for everyone. Everyone agrees? What do you think, Jessica? I think we should let the past stay in the past and focus on moving forward. I could hear Margaret's voice coaching her in the background, though I couldn't make out the specific words. Jessica, do you understand that David's parents are claiming credit for paying for your wedding? That they're telling people I was too poor and too anxious to attend the celebration they generously funded? Mom, they're not trying to hurt you. They're just trying to help people understand why you weren't there. By lying about who paid for what and why I was excluded. They're trying to protect everyone's privacy. Privacy. Jessica had learned their language well. Lies were now privacy protection. And my desire for truth was public embarrassment. Jessica, let me ask you a direct question. And I want you to answer it honestly. Are you proud of where you came from? What kind of question is that? Are you proud that your mother worked 2 jobs to put you through school? Are you proud that I saved for 20 years to pay for your wedding? Are you proud of the sacrifices I made so you could become a doctor? Long silence. Mom, this isn't about being proud or not proud. This is about what's practical now. There it was. The truth, finally. Not shame, exactly, but a calculation. My history was impractical for her new life. Jessica, I love you. I will always love you. But I won't disappear to make your new family's lives more convenient. Mom, please don't do this. Please don't publish anything about our family business. Our family business? Jessica, when did you start considering David's parents part of our family? When I married David. When I became part of their family. And when did you stop considering me part of yours? She didn't answer. I hung up and immediately called Patricia. I need to meet with you today. There's been a development. What kind of development? The kind that makes me realize. This isn't just about correcting the record anymore. This is about something much bigger. We met at the same cafe 2 hours later. I told Patricia about Margaret's phone call and Jessica's family meeting. About the threats and the ultimatums and the careful coordination of lies. Mrs. Martinez, they're trying to force you into complicity with their narrative. Exactly. They want me to stay quiet. While they rewrite history to make themselves the heroes. Patricia pulled out her notebook. I think we need to expand the article. This isn't just about wedding financing anymore. This is about how some families manipulate social narratives to protect their reputations at others' expense. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we document the whole pattern. The lies about payment, the lies about your absence. The coordinated story they've created, and the threats they're making to keep you quiet. She showed me her revised outline. The article would examine not just what had happened on Jessica's wedding day, but how the aftermath revealed the systematic erasure of working class contributions to upper-class celebrations. This would be much more visible than the original plan, Patricia warned. And much more damaging to their reputations. I thought about Margaret's threats, about Jessica's choice to prioritize her new family's comfort over our relationship, about David's genuine confusion when he learned the truth. How damaging. Career affecting damaging. Social circle changing damaging. The kind of consequences that make people reconsider their behavior. I looked at Patricia's revised outline, at the documentation she'd gathered, at the testimony from vendors and witnesses who wanted the truth to be known. Do it, I said. All of it. Let them explain to their friends why they thought lying was more practical than honesty. Tuesday came and went without any word from Jessica. Wednesday morning, Patricia called with news that made everything feel surreal. The article is going to print this afternoon. But Sarah, there's something you should know. It's gotten bigger than we planned. What do you mean bigger? Other people have come forward. People with similar stories about the Chen family and their social circle. This isn't just about your situation anymore. Patricia explained that her preliminary interviews had uncovered a pattern. The Chens had a history of claiming credit for generosity they hadn't shown. Particularly when it came to events involving people from different economic backgrounds. David's cousin got married 2 years ago to a teacher from a working-class family. The Chen family told people they'd helped with that wedding too, when actually the bride's parents had taken out loans to pay for everything. How did you find this out? The bride's mother contacted me after hearing through mutual friends that I was researching wedding financing stories. She wanted to share what had happened to her family. This was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined. Who else contacted you? A family whose daughter dated David's brother briefly. The Chens had made several public comments about helping with expenses for events that the girl's family had actually funded themselves. Always the same pattern. Take credit publicly while contributing nothing privately. Patricia's article had evolved into a comprehensive examination of how certain social circles maintained their reputations through systematic dishonesty about charitable giving and family support. The editor wants to run it as a cover story in next week's newsletter. It's being called, "The Hidden Costs of Social Generosity. When Public Credit Doesn't Match Private Contributions." Cover story. My family's situation had become the centerpiece of an exposé about social manipulation in Phoenix's upper-class community. How many families are featured in the article? 5 different situations over the past 3 years. Yours is the most recent and the most thoroughly documented. But it's part of a clear pattern. I felt something between vindication and vertigo. This wasn't just about my relationship with Jessica anymore. This was about holding an entire social system accountable for its lies. Thursday afternoon, I got 3 phone calls within 20 minutes. The first was from David. "Mrs. Martinez, have you seen the newsletter preview? My parents are. They're very upset." I imagine they are. The article mentions specific dollar amounts, quotes from vendors, even copies of bank records. How did the reporter get access to all that information? I provided it, along with several other families who've had similar experiences with your parents' version of generosity. David was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Martinez, this is going to be devastating for my family's reputation." David, your family's reputation was built on lies. I'm not destroying it, I'm just revealing what was already there. The second call was from Carmen, the caterer, who'd first told me about the family meeting on Jessica's wedding day. "Mrs. Martinez, I just wanted you to know that several other vendors have come forward with stories about the Chen family. Apparently, this pattern goes back years." What kind of stories? Taking credit for payments they didn't make. Claiming they'd negotiated discounts they hadn't arranged. Telling people they'd helped other families with expenses they'd never touched. We've all been comparing notes since Patricia started her research. The third call was from Margaret Chen herself, and her voice was shaking with anger. "Sarah, what you've done is unconscionable. That article will be read by everyone we know. Everyone David and Jessica work with. You've destroyed their professional reputations. To satisfy your petty need for revenge. Margaret, I've told the truth about my own experiences. If that truth damages your reputation, perhaps you should have considered that before you started lying. You've ruined Jessica's life. Her medical colleagues will see this article. David's hospital administration will see it. Everyone will question their integrity now. Everyone will know that Jessica's mother worked multiple jobs and saved for 20 years to pay for a wedding she wasn't allowed to attend. If that ruins Jessica's life, maybe Jessica should ask herself why. Sarah, I'm begging you to call the newsletter and retract your statements. Tell them you exaggerated or misunderstood the situation. There's still time to stop this. There's no misunderstanding, Margaret. You lied about funding my daughter's wedding. You excluded me from a celebration I paid for. You told people I was too poor and too anxious to attend. Those are facts, not interpretations. We can fix this. We can issue our own statement, clarify the misunderstandings, make this right. You can start by telling the truth. Tell people I paid for the wedding. Tell them you excluded me because you thought I was embarrassing. Tell them you've been taking credit for generosity you never showed. Margaret hung up without another word. Friday morning, the newsletter was delivered to 800 households across Phoenix's most exclusive neighborhoods. By noon, my phone was ringing constantly. Linda called first. Sarah, holy shit. I mean, I knew you were planning to set the record straight, but this is everything. The whole pattern, all the families. Years of lies all laid out in black and white. How are people reacting? Social media is exploding. Everyone's talking about it. Some people are defending the Chen family. But most are asking how they got away with this behavior for so long. Maria called an hour later. Mija, you did it. You actually did it. That article is being shared everywhere. People are calling the Chen family the fake charity family, and asking what else they've lied about. By evening, the story had spread beyond the newsletter's original circulation. Local news stations were calling Patricia for follow-up interviews. Social media posts about the article were being shared hundreds of times. Saturday morning, Jessica finally called. Mom. Her voice was small, defeated. I need to talk to you. I'm listening. David and I went to dinner last night at our usual restaurant. 3 different people came up to our table to ask about the newsletter article. David's colleagues are talking about it at the hospital. My attending physician mentioned it during rounds yesterday. And, Mom, everyone knows now. Everyone knows you paid for my wedding and that I didn't invite you. Everyone knows David's parents have been lying about their charitable contributions for years. How do you feel about everyone knowing the truth? Long silence. Embarrassed. Ashamed. Confused about how everything got so messed up. Jessica, do you understand why I did this? I think so. You wanted people to know what really happened. I wanted people to know what really happened. Because your new family was actively lying about what really happened. They weren't just keeping the truth private. They were spreading falsehoods that made them look generous and me look problematic. I know. David's parents are talking about issuing a public apology. But their lawyer says that might make things worse legally. Legally, the lies had been so extensive that they were worried about legal consequences. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Are you sorry that I wasn't at your wedding? Or are you sorry that people now know I wasn't at your wedding? The question hung in the air for a long time. Both, she finally said. I'm sorry about both. Wedding drama story, Scene 11. Chapter 4 Jungi Silhyan. Scene 11 Basinjadeului Malag 3300 Ya. The week following the newsletter publication was unlike anything I'd experienced. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, friends, and strangers who'd read the article. But the most revealing calls came from people I'd never expected to hear from. Monday morning, I received a call from Dr. Amanda Foster, the chief of staff at David's hospital. Mrs. Martinez, I hope you don't mind my calling directly. I obtained your number from the newsletter article's contact information. This was unexpected. Of course, drive. Foster. How can I help you? I wanted to speak with you about David Chen and Jessica Martinez Chen, who are both residents in our program. The article raised some concerns about their professional judgment that our administration needs to address. Professional judgment. The consequences were reaching exactly where Margaret had warned they would. What kind of concerns? Mrs. Martinez, our residency program requires the highest standards of integrity and ethical behavior. When residents demonstrate poor judgment in their personal lives, it raises questions about their decision-making capabilities in medical situations. Dr. Foster explained that the hospital had received calls from several board members who'd read the article. Questions were being raised about David and Jessica's character, their honesty, and their fitness for leadership roles in the medical community. We're not taking any immediate action, drive. Foster continued, but this situation will likely affect their future opportunities within our institution. Department heads are already expressing concerns about recommending them for fellowships or advanced positions. After Dr. Foster hung up, I sat in my kitchen, feeling a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was exactly the kind of professional consequence Margaret had threatened to use against me. Now it was happening to Jessica and David instead. Tuesday brought a call from Patricia with an update that made the scope of the fallout clear. Sarah, the story has taken on a life of its own. The Arizona Republic wants to do a follow-up piece about social deception in affluent communities. 3 other families have come forward with similar experiences involving different wealthy families. How are the Chens handling the attention? Not well. Margaret Chen resigned from her position on the country club's social committee. Richard Chen canceled his planned presentation at next month's medical conference. They're essentially in hiding. Patricia had been tracking the social media response, and the numbers were staggering. The original newsletter article had been shared over 2,000 times on Facebook alone. Local news stations had picked up the story, and it was spreading to other cities with similar social dynamics. There's something else you should know, Patricia continued. Several vendors who've worked with the Chen family over the years have come forward with stories about unpaid bills and disputed contracts. It seems their reputation for generosity was covering up a pattern of financial irresponsibility. This was getting bigger than even I had anticipated. What kind of financial issues? Unpaid catering bills, disputed photography fees, last-minute cancellations without compensation. The country club is apparently reviewing several complaints that were previously dismissed because of the family's social standing. Wednesday brought the most significant call of all. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom, I need to see you. Can I come over after work?" Of course. She arrived that evening looking exhausted and defeated. The confident young doctor who'd texted me not to come to her wedding had been replaced by someone who looked younger, more uncertain, almost fragile. "Mom, everything is falling apart." I poured her tea and waited for her to continue. "David's parents are talking about leaving town, moving to his uncle's practice in Denver, where people don't know about the article. David is considering transferring to a different residency program. And how do you feel about that?" Terrified. Confused. I don't understand how everything got so bad so fast. Jessica curled up in my living room chair, the same way she used to when she was a child seeking comfort after a difficult day. "The other residents are treating us differently now. Not openly hostile, but distant, like they're not sure if we can be trusted." Dr. Peterson, my supervising physician, asked me directly if the article was accurate. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you paid for my wedding and I didn't invite you. Because I was worried about how you'd fit in with David's family's friends." She started crying. "Mom, when I said it out loud like that, I realized how horrible it sounds." How did Drive Peterson respond? He said he was disappointed in my judgment. And that he'd expected better from someone he'd been considering for chief resident next year. Jessica wiped her eyes. "Mom, I think I've ruined my career over a wedding day." I sat down across from her. "Jessica, you didn't ruin your career over a wedding day. You damaged your reputation by choosing to exclude your mother from a celebration she paid for. Then allowing your new family to lie about what happened. I know that now. But how'd I fix it?" This was the question I'd been waiting for. The moment when Jessica might finally take responsibility for her choices. Instead of just dealing with their consequences. You start by telling the truth publicly. You issue a statement acknowledging what really happened, apologizing for your role in the deception, and taking responsibility for your decisions. David's parents say that would make things worse legally. David's parents are worried about protecting themselves, not about rebuilding your integrity. Jessica, you have to decide who you want to be. Someone who hides behind other people's advice. Or someone who takes responsibility for her own choices. Thursday morning, Jessica called me back. "Mom, I wrote a statement. I want you to read it before I publish it anywhere." She came over during her lunch break. With a 2-page letter addressed to the medical community, the country club membership, and anyone else who'd read the original newsletter article. The statement was everything I'd hoped for. Jessica acknowledged that I had paid for her wedding entirely. She explained that she had excluded me because she was worried about social impressions. Not because of any conflict between us. She took full responsibility for allowing David's parents to spread false information about the financial arrangements. Most importantly, she apologized directly to me, publicly, for treating the mother who'd sacrificed everything for her education as an embarrassment to be managed. Jessica, this is exactly what needed to be said. Will you forgive me, Mom? I know I don't deserve it, but will you forgive me? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Not the polished young professional she'd been trying to become, not the carefully managed image she'd been presenting to David's family. But the girl I'd raised. The girl who made mistakes but could acknowledge them. The girl who could still ask for forgiveness when she knew she was wrong. "I forgave you the moment you walked back into my apartment honestly," I said. "But forgiving you and trusting you are different things. Trust will take time to rebuild." "I understand. Mom, there's something else. David and I are talking about going to couples counseling. He says he doesn't recognize the person he married. And I'm not sure I do either." That sounds like a good idea. Jessica published her statement on Friday morning. By afternoon, the response was overwhelmingly positive. The medical community appreciated her honesty and accountability. Social media comments praised her courage in taking responsibility for her mistakes. Dr. Foster called me that evening with an update. "Mrs. Martinez, I wanted you to know that your daughter's statement went a long way toward repairing the damage to her professional reputation. Taking responsibility for poor judgment is exactly what we hope to see from our residents when they make mistakes." But the most important call came from David. "Mrs. Martinez, Jessica and I both want to thank you." "For what?" "For not letting us get away with treating you badly. For insisting that the truth mattered more than our comfort. For loving Jessica enough to hold her accountable when no one else would." 2 weeks after Jessica's public apology, I received an unexpected visitor. Through my peephole, I saw a woman in an expensive business suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She looked like a lawyer, and her presence at my door on a Saturday morning suggested this wasn't a social call. "Mrs. Martinez? I'm Jennifer Walsh, representing Drive." Richard Chen and his wife Margaret. May I come in? I invited her inside, curious about what the Chen family's legal strategy might be. Mrs. Martinez, my clients are prepared to offer you a settlement to resolve this matter quietly and permanently. What kind of settlement? Ms. Walsh opened her briefcase and pulled out a formal document. Full reimbursement for all wedding expenses you documented, plus $50,000 in additional compensation for your distress. In exchange, you would agree to issue a public retraction of your statements and sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing you from discussing this matter further. $87,000 plus $50,000. They were offering me $137,000 to disappear quietly and let them rebuild their reputations without interference. And if I don't accept this offer, my clients will be forced to pursue legal action for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The publicity from a lawsuit would be unfortunate for everyone involved. I read through the settlement terms carefully. The Chen family wanted me to publicly admit that I had mischaracterized their generosity and misunderstood their intentions regarding the wedding arrangements. They wanted me to state that their exclusion of me had been based on mutual agreement, rather than their decision alone. Ms. Walsh, this settlement requires me to lie publicly about what happened. I'd have to claim that being uninvited from my daughter's wedding was my choice, and that the Chen family was generous rather than deceptive. The settlement provides appropriate compensation for any misunderstanding that may have occurred. There was no misunderstanding. There was deliberate deception followed by public lies designed to protect the Chen family's reputation at the expense of mine. Ms. Walsh's professional composure slipped slightly. Mrs. Martinez, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. My clients have significant financial resources and strong legal representation. If this proceeds to litigation, the costs could be substantial for someone in your financial position. The threat was delivered politely, but it was unmistakable. Accept the settlement or face financial ruin through expensive legal battles. Can I have some time to consider this offer? Certainly. My clients would appreciate a response by Monday morning. After Ms. Walsh left, I called Linda for advice. My sister had worked as a paralegal for 15 years before retiring, and she understood legal strategy better than I did. Sarah, this is actually good news, Linda said after I read her the settlement terms. How is being threatened with a lawsuit good news? Because it means they're desperate. If the Chen family had a strong legal case, they wouldn't be offering you money to stay quiet. They'd be demanding money from you. Linda explained that defamation cases were notoriously difficult to win when the published information was factually accurate. Since everything in Patricia's article had been verified through bank records, vendor interviews, and documented communications, the Chen family would have to prove that the facts themselves were somehow defamatory. What they're really worried about isn't legal liability. It's continued public attention. Every day this story stays in circulation, more people learn about their behavior. Monday morning, I called Ms. Walsh with my response. I'm declining your settlement offer. Mrs. Martinez, I strongly advise you to reconsider. My clients are prepared to proceed with legal action if necessary. Then they should proceed. I look forward to the discovery process, where they'll have to provide documentation for all their claims about charitable giving and family support over the past several years. There was a long pause. Mrs. Martinez, litigation will be expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. Ms. Walsh, I've spent 28 years working multiple jobs to support my daughter's dreams. I'm not intimidated by expensive and time-consuming processes. When the outcome matters. I never heard from Jennifer Walsh again. Within a week, Patricia told me that the Chen family had hired a crisis management firm to rebuild their public image rather than pursuing legal action. The social consequences, however, were immediate and lasting. Margaret Chen's resignation from the country club's social committee was just the beginning. The club's board quietly asked her to step down from 2 other volunteer positions after members complained about her involvement in their charitable events. Dr. Richard Chen faced professional consequences as well. The medical conference where he'd been scheduled to speak decided his presentation on medical ethics in community practice would be inappropriate given recent circumstances. 3 professional organizations where he held leadership positions asked him to consider whether his continued involvement was in the organization's best interests. The country club itself launched an investigation into other families who might have been claiming credit for charitable contributions they hadn't made. 2 other member families were quietly asked to clarify discrepancies between their public claims and their actual financial records. Most significantly, the club revised its policies about publicizing member generosity. New guidelines required documentation before any charitable contributions could be mentioned in newsletters or social media posts. But the consequences extended beyond the Chen family's immediate social circle. Jessica and David's wedding story became a cautionary tale throughout Phoenix's medical community about the importance of personal integrity in professional life. Dr. Foster called me with a final update about Jessica and David's status at the hospital. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted you to know that both residents have responded very well to this situation. Their willingness to take responsibility and learn from their mistakes has actually impressed our faculty. How so? Medical professionals make errors in judgment. It's inevitable in high-pressure careers. What matters is how they respond when those errors are exposed. Jessica and David have demonstrated the kind of accountability we hope to see from future physicians. Dr. Foster explained that Jessica's public apology had been used as a case study in the residency program's ethics training. Her statement about choosing professional advancement over family loyalty had prompted important discussions about maintaining personal integrity while building medical careers. Your daughter's honesty about her mistakes has probably helped her career more than hiding them would have. The final social consequence came 3 months later when David's younger brother announced his engagement to a kindergarten teacher from a working-class family. The engagement party invitation specifically mentioned that both families would be contributing to the celebration, and that all parents and grandparents were eagerly anticipated guests. Patricia called me with this update, laughing. Sarah, your story has apparently changed how this family approaches wedding planning. They're being very transparent about financial arrangements and very inclusive about guest lists. I'm glad something positive came out of all this drama. Oh, there's been lots of positive outcomes. 3 other families have come forward to correct their own misstatements about charitable giving. The country club has organized financial literacy workshops to help members understand the real costs of the events they sponsor. And several vendors have told me that wealthy clients are being much more honest about their budgets. Sometimes, it takes one family's public reckoning to change an entire community's behavior. 6 months after the newsletter article changed everything, I was sitting in a small restaurant in downtown Phoenix, waiting for Jessica and David to join me for what had become our monthly family dinner. These meals had started tentatively, with careful conversations and unspoken boundaries. Now they felt more natural, though we were all still learning how to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by secrets and lies. Jessica arrived first, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in over a year. The intense pressure to fit into David's family's social world had eased considerably since their public reckoning, without the constant stress of managing impressions and maintaining facades. My daughter seemed to be rediscovering who she actually was. Hi, Mom. Sorry I'm running a few minutes late. Surgery went longer than expected. How did it go? Really well. Dr. Peterson let me take the lead on the procedure. He said my attention to detail has improved significantly over the past few months. David arrived as Jessica was settling into her chair. Their relationship had survived the crisis, but it looked different now. Less performance, more genuine partnership. They'd completed 6 months of couples counseling, and were talking openly about the problems that had led to their wedding day disaster. Mrs. Martinez, I have some news I wanted to share with both of you, David said as he sat down. Good news, I hope? Very good. I've been accepted into the Cardiothoracic Surgery Fellowship at UCLA. It's the program I've wanted since medical school. But I never thought I had a realistic chance of getting in. Jessica beamed with pride. Tell her what the program director said. David looked slightly embarrassed. He said my application essay about learning from personal mistakes was one of the most honest and insightful he'd read. He specifically mentioned that my willingness to take responsibility for poor judgment demonstrated the kind of character they want in their surgeons. This was ironic in the best possible way. The public accountability that had initially damaged David's reputation had ultimately helped him secure the fellowship he'd dreamed of. I'm so proud of you, David. When does the program start? Next July, which means we'll be moving to Los Angeles in 6 months. I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. Jessica moving away again, just as we were rebuilding our relationship. But this time was different. This time, she was including me in her plans, rather than announcing decisions that had already been made. Mom, we've been talking about the move, and we want you to consider coming with us. This was unexpected. To Los Angeles? There's a huge demand for experienced nurses in LA medical centers, Jessica continued. David's program includes family housing assistance, and we could help you find a position at one of the hospitals near UCLA. David nodded enthusiastically. We've learned how important family relationships are, Mrs. Martinez. We don't want distance to damage what we've been rebuilding. I was touched by the offer, but also realistic about what it represented. That's very generous, but I have a life here. My job, my friends, my apartment. We know, Jessica said quickly. We're not asking you to uproot your entire life for us. We're asking if you'd be interested in exploring new possibilities that would let us stay close as a family. The conversation continued through dinner, with Jessica and David sharing their research about Los Angeles nursing opportunities, housing options, and the logistics of relocating. They'd clearly put serious thought into making sure any move would benefit me, as much as it helped them maintain family connections. Can I think about it? I asked as we finished our meal. Of course. We just want you to know that you're a priority in our planning now, not an afterthought. After Jessica and David left, I drove to my apartment, thinking about how much had changed since that terrible Saturday morning when everything fell apart. The wedding crisis had revealed problems that had been building for months. But it had also created opportunities for honest conversations that might never have happened otherwise. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. How was dinner with the kids? I texted back, they want me to move to LA with them. What did you tell them? That I'd think about it. It's nice to be included in the planning this time, instead of just informed about the results. Linda called me as I was unlocking my apartment door. Sarah, are you actually considering moving? I'm considering lots of things these days. The Mediterranean cruise taught me that I enjoy new experiences more than I expected. The cruise had been everything I'd hoped for and more. 15 days of museums, ancient ruins, excellent food, and conversations with strangers who knew nothing about wedding drama or family conflicts. I'd returned to Phoenix feeling more confident about my ability to build a life that made me happy, rather than just making other people comfortable. What kinds of things are you considering? Travel nursing positions, maybe. There are programs that let experienced nurses work. Temporary assignments in different cities. I could spend 6 months in Los Angeles near Jessica, then 6 months somewhere completely new. Linda laughed. My sister the adventurer. Who would have predicted that? I think I've spent so many years focused on Jessica's future that I forgot I could have adventures of my own. The wedding disaster was horrible, but it forced me to ask what I wanted from my life. Not just what I wanted for Jessica's life. We talked for another hour about possibilities, opportunities, and the strange freedom that comes from having your worst fears realized and surviving them. I'd been terrified of losing Jessica's love and respect. But when it actually happened, I'd discovered that my identity wasn't entirely dependent on being her mother. Wednesday brought an unexpected phone call. That reminded me how far the ripple effects of our family story had spread. Mrs. Martinez? This is Catherine Webb from the Arizona Women's Foundation. I'm calling because we'd like to invite you to speak at our annual conference. Speak about what? Financial sacrifice and family boundaries. Your story has resonated with many women who've made similar sacrifices for their children's futures. We'd like you to share your experience and the lessons you've learned about maintaining self-respect while supporting family dreams. The invitation was flattering, but also daunting. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give advice to anyone. I made plenty of mistakes throughout this process. Mrs. Martinez, that's exactly why we want you to speak. Not because you handled everything perfectly, but because you figured out how to stand up for yourself when the situation required it. Many women struggle with that balance. I accepted the speaking invitation, partly because it seemed like an opportunity to help other people avoid the mistakes Jessica and I had made, and partly because it represented another new experience in a life that was suddenly full of possibilities. The conference was scheduled for 2 months later, which gave me time to think about what I'd learned and how to share those lessons constructively. What would I tell other mothers who were sacrificing their own financial security for their children's dreams? How could they avoid the resentment and manipulation that had nearly destroyed my relationship with Jessica? That evening, I called Jessica to tell her about the speaking invitation. Mom, that's wonderful. What are you going to talk about? I'm not sure yet. Maybe about the importance of honest communication. About expectations and boundaries. Maybe about the difference between supporting someone and enabling poor behavior. Will you talk about what happened between us? Only if it helps other families avoid similar problems. Jessica, would you be comfortable with me discussing our situation publicly? She was quiet for a moment. Actually, yes. If our story helps other families communicate better, then something positive comes from all the pain we caused each other. This was progress. 6 months ago, Jessica had been terrified of public attention about our family problems. Now she was willing to have those problems discussed, if it might help other people. Mom, can I ask you something? Always. Are you happier now than you were before the wedding? I mean, overall. Despite all the drama and hurt feelings? I considered the question carefully. Yes, I think I am. Not because of the conflict, but because of the honesty that came after it. I feel like I know who you are now, not just who I hoped you were. I feel the same way about myself. Wedding Drama Story, Scene 14. Chapter 5 Seilun Sijig. Scene 14 Gyeohungwa Seongjang Seilun Gajagwangye 3300 Ya. 8 months after the wedding crisis, I stood at the podium of the Arizona Women's Foundation annual conference, looking out at 300 faces of women who'd come to hear about financial sacrifice and family boundaries. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I'd given this presentation 4 times in the past 2 months. And each telling had helped me understand my own story better. How many of you have worked extra jobs to pay for your children's education? I asked the audience. Nearly half the hands in the room went up. How many of you have delayed your own dreams to fund your children's dreams? Even more hands. And how many of you have ever felt taken for granted by the children you sacrificed for? Almost every hand in the room rose, accompanied by knowing nods and uncomfortable laughter. Then you understand why I'm here today. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I want to tell you about the most expensive lesson I've ever learned about love, boundaries, and self-respect. I shared the story of Jessica's wedding, but not as a tale of revenge or family drama. Instead, I focused on the patterns that had led to our crisis. My inability to communicate my expectations clearly. Jessica's assumption that my sacrifices came without emotional costs. And the dangerous dynamic of unconditional giving without mutual respect. The problem wasn't that I paid for my daughter's wedding. I explained to the audience. The problem was that I'd trained her to expect my financial support without considering my emotional needs. I'd confused being selfless with being invisible. After my presentation, the response was overwhelming. Women approached me with their own stories of financial sacrifice and family tensions. Some were still in the middle of difficult situations with ungrateful children. Others had already experienced their own versions of my wedding day reckoning. One woman, probably in her 60s, waited until the crowd around me had dispersed before approaching. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to thank you for your honesty. I paid for my son's graduate school education, and when he got married last year, his wife's family planned the entire wedding without including me. I felt hurt but didn't know how to address it without seeming petty. What did you do? Nothing, at the time. But after hearing your story, I realized I need to have an honest conversation with my son about how their choices made me feel. Not to punish them, but to make sure we don't build our relationship on unspoken resentments. These conversations happened after every speaking engagement. Women who'd been struggling alone with the complex emotions of sacrificial parenting found comfort in hearing that their feelings were valid and their boundaries were necessary. The speaking circuit had become an unexpected new chapter in my life. Not just the conferences, but the connections I was making with other women who'd navigated similar challenges. I joined a support group for parents rebuilding relationships with adult children. And I'd started volunteering with a financial literacy program that helped families communicate about money expectations. 3 weeks after the Arizona conference, Jessica called with news that changed everything again. Mom, David and I have been talking, and we've made a decision about Los Angeles. Your parents' sacrifices are part of your success story. If you can't acknowledge that openly and proudly, then you're building your future on a foundation of dishonesty. That never ends well. What would you tell parents about setting financial boundaries with adult children? Start by being honest about what you can afford and what you expect in return. Not money, respect, inclusion, acknowledgement. If you're paying for significant expenses in your child's life, you have the right to expect appropriate involvement in the decisions that affect you. I think about the bank receipt from that terrible Saturday morning. About the moment I decided to stop enabling Jessica's poor treatment of me. And if your financial support isn't valued or acknowledged appropriately, stop providing it. Your children are adults. They can figure out how to fund their own dreams. Or they can learn to appreciate the help you're offering. Looking back on this entire experience, do you have any regrets? I've been asked this question many times, and my answer has evolved. As I've processed everything that happened, I regret that it took a crisis to force us into honest communication. I regret that Jessica felt pressure to choose between me and her new family. instead of insisting that they treat me with respect. I regret that David's parents thought lying was easier than acknowledging the truth. I pause, considering what I don't regret. But I don't regret stopping those payments. I don't regret insisting that the truth be told publicly. And I don't regret refusing to disappear quietly to make other people's lives more convenient. What's your relationship with Jessica and David like now? This question always makes me smile. It's the relationship I always hoped we'd have, but didn't know how to create. We talk honestly about problems instead of pretending they don't exist. They include me in their planning because they value my input, not because they need my money. We spend time together because we enjoy each other's company, not because anyone feels obligated. I think about our upcoming European trip, about their decision to stay in Phoenix, about the house they're buying that's close enough for regular family dinners. We're building something new together, based on mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations. It's taken a year of hard work, but we're finally the family I always thought we were. What's next for you personally? I'm finishing my bachelor's degree in nursing. I'm planning to do some travel nursing assignments in different cities. Jessica and David encouraged me to explore opportunities that interest me, instead of just focusing on their needs. I look at the acceptance letter from the European Nursing Exchange Program I've applied to. For the first time in 28 years, I'm making decisions based on what I want to do with my life, not just what my daughter needs from me. It's terrifying and exhilarating. Any final advice for our listeners? I take a deep breath, thinking about all the women who've shared their stories with me over the past year. Remember that you matter too. Your dreams, your needs, your happiness, they matter too. You can love your children completely, while still expecting them to treat you with dignity and respect. Supporting your family doesn't require you to disappear into the background of their lives. The people who truly love you will find ways to include you that honor both your sacrifices and their independence. I pause, thinking about the Mediterranean cruise that started my journey toward self-advocacy. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for your family is to stop accepting poor treatment, not because you love them less, but because you love yourself enough to demand better. After the interview ends, I sit quietly in my apartment for a few minutes. Tomorrow, Jessica and David are taking me to look at the house they're buying. They want my opinion on the guest room they're designing for my visits, and they want to show me the backyard where they're planning family barbecues. Next month, I start my first travel nursing assignment in Seattle. 3 months later, I'll be back in Phoenix for Jessica's birthday. In the spring, we'll take that European trip we've been planning. For the first time in my adult life, I have a calendar full of adventures that are mine, and a family that supports those adventures instead of competing with them. The phone rings again. It's Jessica, calling to confirm our plans for tomorrow. Hi, Mom. Are you ready to see our new house? I can't wait, sweetheart. I'm proud of the life you and David are building together. We couldn't have built it without everything you taught us. Even the hard lessons. Especially the hard lessons. As I hang up the phone, I realize that the wedding crisis that seemed to destroy our family actually saved it. We just had to break everything apart before we could put it back together the right way. Sometimes, love requires us to risk losing everything in order to build something better. It was the most expensive lesson I've ever learned, but it was worth every penny.